Welcome to the Room of Lives. I'm your host, Neil. Today we are meeting Hanan Hashem, who was born in a Yemeni family in Saudi Arabia, and shortly after, her family immigrated to the United States. Hanan is working on her PhD in counseling psychology. Her interests are in therapy for young American Muslims, and although she is only 27, she works as a therapist for many people who are decades older than her. She also does research and teaching at the nonprofit Family and Youth Institute, which focuses on promoting the mental health of American Muslims. Hanan has published several research articles on these topics, and her community work has focused on youth empowerment through school and masjid-based youth groups and regional camps, workshops, and conferences. You can get in touch with her through her website, heyhashem.com. Okay, it's time for that question again. How did I meet Hanan? Well, for a short time in the recent past, I was crashing with my friend Stefan, the cosmologist who has been on this podcast. Now, it turned out, coincidentally, that right underneath his apartment lived a guy who had taught with me at a women's prison. So one evening I went to say hello to this guy and find him talking to this girl who he knows because they are both counseling psychologists. This was Hanan, and we all introduced ourselves and what we do, and had a short chat, which immediately made me feel that I wanted her on my podcast. So what was it that I saw in her in this brief encounter? Well, she was smart, funny, humble, and from a true story she shared, I noticed that something that would anger most people only made her curious, which is a big deal trait to me. Also, she said that she liked my energy, and since I know beyond doubt that my energy is terrific, I immediately realized that she must be a wise woman and must know many other secrets of the universe which I could learn from her. So it came to pass that on a bright fall day, I took a train to where she lives, and this time we had a long conversation, and we ate cookies and ice cream and tacos and drove to the top of a hill and looked at the Austin night skyline. This conversation was an intensely transformative experience for me, as you will pick up from the sounds I made during the recording. To me, it really felt that time disappeared. And I grew and learned so much and got excited and giddy, and the first time I looked at the clock, it had been 5 hours. Earlier that day, I was trying to reassemble my elaborate set of home theater speakers, which I had painstakingly collected from different sources over several years and worked out how to connect together after much investigation and effort. But right before I was to leave for Hanan's, I connected them wrong and turned them on, and in an instant, most of the system got fried. I became pretty upset, but forced myself to walk back from it, sit down on the floor facing the damaged equipment, and tried to notice how I was feeling, and gradually maneuver my attention away from these speakers and towards the human I was just going to have a deep conversation with. My conversation with Hanan following this upsetting incident turned out to be so enriching, immersive, and uplifting that it seemed like the universe had deployed some teaching device at me on that day. I am still unsure about what exactly the lesson was, but I think it may be a reminder that I should value people more than things or something like that. Okay, so this first part is intro to Hanan. She tells us about her early life, family, and the discrimination they faced as Yemenis in Saudi Arabia. She tells us about her education, her curiosity about the world, excitement about learning, and her journey from math to logic to philosophy to psychology, and how she advanced through school faster than almost everyone else, into doing research, therapy, and community work on discrimination. If you enjoy visiting the Room of Lives, consider donating Ether, DAI, or other Ethereum-based coins to abranil.eth. That's ABHRANIL.ETH. Okay, shall we?
We shall. Do you need anything?
No, not at the moment. Like, we can take breaks in the middle and get things that we want.
That sounds good.
Okay. All right. How do you exactly pronounce your name? I know that you
in Arabic?
No.
Like, how do I pronounce it with people generally?
Yeah.
Hanan.
Hanan. But Hashem has emphasis on the first.
Hashem.
Hashem. Okay.
Yeah. And so in Arabic, the long vowel in my first name is on the second part, but the long vowel in my last name is on the first part.
Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. So tell me a little bit about your childhood and upbringing. What do your parents do? And your educational background. Mm-hmm. Intro to Hanan.
Intro to Hanan.
Hanan 101.
Okay, let's start. Okay, so I was born in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
In Riyadh, because my parents went to medical school there. And so my parents are from Yemen. So I'm Yemeni, ethnically Yemeni, but my parents went to Saudi Arabia for school. And then I was born there, and my older brother was born there. And when I turned 1, my dad graduated, and he was trying to find a residency. But they are very racist in Saudi Arabia, and they straight up told him, because you are Yemeni, we don't want to give you a job.
Oh, your dad is a doctor?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so both my parents have their MDs.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so at that point, my dad has 2 kids. He has a little family. He doesn't know what to do. Mm-hmm. And he actually recalled a story about how he finally got an interview, and it was a few hours away. And he drove all the way there. And as soon as he got there, they were like, oh, we didn't know you were Yemeni. If we knew that, we wouldn't have offered you the interview. Mm. So it was very blatant discrimination. Mm. And so at that point, he was kind of reaching out to all of his connections, and he had a professor at his university who knew about an opportunity in Detroit. And when he brought it up with my mom told us that she was absolutely terrified. She was like, we can't go to America. They kill people on the streets there. There's no way that we're going to go to America. But of course, that was his only option.
Wait, who kills people on the streets? What was your mom referring to?
My mom was thinking that America's a very violent place.
Okay.
Yeah. And which makes sense, given that, she grew up in Saudi Arabia and the Middle East, and the relationship between the Middle East and America is not a very friendly one.
Yeah.
And so a lot of what the Middle Eastern people know about America is that America came into the Middle East and ruined a lot of countries and killed a lot of people. And so my mom was just like, how can we just go live there? That doesn't make sense. We've never been there. But my dad did end up taking the position there. And so for the first year of my life, I didn't really know my dad because he was in Detroit and we were in Saudi Arabia. And then when he had enough money and he had a good standing and he found a place to live, we came to Detroit. So this was me, my older brother, and my mom. And so we lived in Detroit until I was about 9 years old or 10.
So right after you were born, your dad moved to Detroit?
Correct. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. It was a few months after. Mm-hmm. And so my mom, though, she had a year left, I believe, for med school too. So that was another reason that we stayed there. But when she finished med school and then she came here, she wasn't able to do residency because she had 2 kids to raise. And so there was nowhere to put us. And so she kind of put her school on the back burner. And to this day, she never completed her residency. And so she just has this medical degree, but has never practiced. And it's been really interesting seeing her perspective on life and education, given that reality for her. She's always been a big advocate of education. And like really that she's, you know, very much like, you have to get your education. Like, you must only rely on yourself. You can't rely on other people. And I feel like that comes from a lot of different places for her. But I feel very grateful for it because typically in Yemeni culture, that's just not typical in Yemeni culture at all. So when I came here to Texas for my graduate program, my mom actually ended up getting a lot of backlash from the community, from the Yemeni community. Like, people were straight up telling her, like, it's a sin that you let your daughter go to Texas by herself because...
But by this time, your entire family had been living in the United States for a while.
Right, but even the Yemeni American community...
The Yemeni American
community, right, still has, like, a lot of, you know, cultural values, which makes sense. They're holding on to their ethnic identity. And so she got a lot of backlash from that. But, I mean, she stood her ground, and she knows that this was the right decision for me. But rewind to when I was a child. So it's really interesting when I think about me as a kid. Let's see, I would describe myself as like, I was just very curious about the world, and I was very, I was just trying to make sense of things. And so when I was about, I want to say 5 years old, so as you know, in the winter time, the days get a lot shorter. And in Michigan, because it's north from here, it's even shorter than in Texas. And, you know, our bedtime was, and then in the summer, it's like longer, even longer than it is here. And so in the summertime, our bedtime is around 8 o'clock, but 8 o'clock over there, the sun is still up. And so my mom was telling us, I was a little kid, and she's like, you have to go to bed. And I was like, oh. I was like, is the machine that makes the sky move to make it nighttime not working anymore? Is it broken? Is that why, like, it's still sunlight, but it's 8 o'clock and we have to go to bed? And I remember her, like, laughing and being like, oh, yeah.
How old were you?
I was, like, 5, 6. I was very little. Because I know it was definitely before 9 because I was in Michigan. I mean, I was in Detroit.
Yeah.
And I just remember because that's just how my mind worked. I would try to understand, like, where does the rain come from? Like, how is it that the sky is moving and we're not moving? Is something controlling it? And in my mind, I saw it as, like, gears.
Oh my God.
On this, like, wallpaper. Yeah.
You basically went through humanity's conception of the firmament and everything just in one lifetime.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's just... Oh, here's my other pen. And so that's just how that's just how I thought about things. And I remember when I was in... So, I was really excited to go to school. I remember being really excited to go to school. This was when I was 3 years old. And I remember because I remember my first day of school when I was 3 and a half. Okay, so my birthday's in December. And my mom was like, we need to put her in school. She's already, like, talking. She's already, like, you know, conversating, having these philosophical conversations with us. We have to put her in school. But because my birthday's in December, there's a cutoff for age. So, like, if you're 3, like, if you're turning 4 after December, then you have to wait the next year to go to preschool. But my mom found the one school that let me attend because their cutoff was the end of December, and most schools' cutoff was the beginning of December. And she was like, you just need to be in school. So I started school kind of early. I was 3 and a half. And I remember very clearly the first day where I was walking to school, and we passed this market, and there was, like, words on it, and I remember, like, telling my mom, like, oh my God, like, I'm gonna learn how to read that. Like, that's so exciting to me. Because I was just like, I'm gonna unlock this whole new world of information. And so, so I went to school, so I was 3 and a half when I started. And then when I was in second grade, 2 months into second grade, I was called to the principal's office. I have absolutely no idea what's going on. I was just like, oh, I'm a second grader, just doing my second grade things. And I go to the principal's office, and he's like, sit down, and he like gives me a book to read and like some math questions and like all of this stuff. And I was just like, okay, I'll just do it. I have no idea what's happening. And then this was like on like, I think the beginning of the week.
Yeah. And
then by the end of the week, my teacher told me, on Monday, you're going to 3rd grade. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess I'll just go to 3rd grade. Like, I'm just going to be in 3rd grade now.
Yeah. Is the machine that keeps me in 2nd grade not working anymore?
Yeah. At that point, I was just like, okay, I mean, I guess they're kind of related to each other, but even then, I didn't really recognize that they were, like, testing my ability to see, like, that I should, like, skip a grade. So at this point, I was 3 in preschool, 4 in kindergarten, 5 in 1st grade, and then 6 in 2nd grade. And so because I got promoted to 3rd grade, I was a 6-year-old in 3rd grade. But 6-year-olds are typically in 1st grade.
Yeah, okay.
So at that point...
So you were with 8-year-olds?
Yes.
Roughly.
So I was like a 6-year-old with 8-year-olds.
Yeah.
And that kind of followed me through. I was always like, 2 years younger than people around me. But intellectually, I didn't feel any younger. I felt like I was just pretty average with the people. Like, I felt like that was where I was being challenged, right?
Yeah. How old are you now?
Right now, I'm turning 27 in a couple weeks.
Yeah, cool. Yeah.
And then in high school, so it was Detroit up until 5th grade. And then middle school, I went to Toledo, Ohio. Not a very good experience because I went into this new environment as a 9-year-old, I think, at that point, in middle school. And middle schoolers are not very nice to you. And so I experienced a lot of bullying. And because I came from Detroit, I wasn't really socialized. Like, the community that we lived in Detroit was very Yemeni. So I actually remember thinking that, like, the whole world was Yemeni because that's just what it was. Like, I recognized I lived in America, but it was Yemeni people, and I didn't recognize that those two things are different. So middle school wasn't very fun, but that was also when I started realizing that I'm more different than that's when I really started realizing, like, oh, I am younger than people. I started realizing coming from Detroit really did impact me. Stuff like that. And then in high school, we moved back to Michigan. And for high school, it's just typically 4 years, from 9th to 12th grade. And I remember in high school being like, what am I doing here? Like, I just want to go to college. And so I did high school in 3 years instead of 4 years.
Okay.
Instead of 4 years. So I graduated from high school at 15 years old, where people typically graduate at 17, 18. And so I went into college as, like, this 15-year-old, which, of course, like, shaped a lot of my experiences. I didn't seem 15, but as I think back on it, there was a lot of things developmentally that, like, I was not necessarily prepared for. Like, in it took me a long time to accept that there are just some things that I'm just not going to know. So, like, there's a lot of gaps in my knowledge because of, like, the developmental kind of speed that I went through things. And it took me a long time to just be okay with that. And so today, I feel very comfortable, like, when someone says something, if it's, like, a word I don't know or, like, a concept or whatever it is, or if they say something I just don't understand, I feel very comfortable being like, hold on, I don't know what you just said. And I used to feel very embarrassed by that. I used to feel very, very embarrassed that I was, like, supposed to be really smart, but, like, didn't know some of these things. But now I feel very comfortable just kind of, like, so with Nolan, he brings up a lot of conversation. So Nolan is a mutual friend of ours. He brings up in a lot of conversation, a lot of references that I just, like, don't know. And even in the beginning of our friendship, I would just be like, oh, okay. But now I'm just like, hold on. I need you to explain this to me, even if it means an interruption in our conversation. Because that's really important to me, that I really know where you're coming from and how this shapes your understanding of things. Yeah.
Is this a lot of, like pop cultural stuff or, like, things?
I mean, it's a lot of things. So pop cultural references, but also historical references, but also cultural references, but also like, even if it's, I mean, so I didn't grow up with a lot of pop culture, and so I know like one thing that a lot of people ask me, like, oh, did you watch SpongeBob growing up? Did you watch SpongeBob?
Yeah, a little bit.
I didn't watch SpongeBob.
Yeah,
like,
you had better things to do.
Right. I have better things to think about.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's like one example where I used to feel very embarrassed that I didn't know these things.
Yeah.
But now I feel way more comfortable just being like, nope, I have no idea.
Wow.
Tell me why that's relevant to this. Like, just let me know. There's no shame involved in it anymore.
But have you watched SpongeBob?
I've seen like a couple episodes, yeah.
You don't seem to approve.
I mean, I just haven't had like, you know, any specific motivation, right, to sit and watch it. It seems like a really funny show, and I'm sure I'd love it.
Yeah.
But, you know, there's a lot of things that I really enjoy watching, so.
Okay.
So that's kind of like my academic life, I would say, almost like intellectual.
Yeah.
And even in high school, I was talking to a friend of mine about this. Even in high school, I was never, and I think just my entire childhood, I was never okay with just like accepting things. I always wanted to understand like how can we change the structure of things? Like the status quo I didn't just like accept the status quo. And I think it's because I like moved a little bit, you know, a few times. But the places that I moved from were just very different from one another. So for example, when I was in 9th or 10th grade, and at this point I must have been like, you know, 11 or 12, or 13, I was like, you know, it would be really cool if high school students got to teach elementary school students, for a day. And so I like created this program where, high school students can like team up with an elementary school teacher and like choose a day where they teach the students instead of the teacher, because it would just be like a really cool experience. I don't know why, but I just thought like that was so cool. That was so cool to do. And so I went ahead and like, you know, organized it. And I remember like thinking back at it, like a lot of people being like, why are you, you know, just kind of like, what's the reason? Like, why are you doing this extra thing? And honestly, it was just because, like, I wanted to experience something different. Like, I just wanted to put myself in someone else's shoes and see what it would be like. Yeah.
Did you end up doing it?
Mm-hmm.
So, as a high school student, you taught some elementary?
Yeah. I taught 2nd grade, and I think I also taught, like, 6th grade for a day. It was really interesting. The 6th grade class I taught, it was a math class. And they were learning about angles. And I love math. I was a mathlete in high school. They were learning about angles, and I remember telling them, like, guys, did you know that triangles can only be, what is it, like 180, what is it?
180.
180 degrees, right?
Yeah.
And their minds were like blown, and they spent like most of the class trying to prove me wrong. And so everyone was like drawing triangles and like using a protractor. Yeah. And it was like, it was just really a cool experience to see, like to teach these young people.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure it like really was like helpful.
There are
in
some
a lot
triangles
of ways.
that don't have to be 180.
Really?
Yeah.
Like
not on a flat surface, but on a curved surface, they are no longer 180.
Yeah, I'm sure on a curved surface, but we don't have to tell the skaters that.
But think about this. If you take the Earth, and you draw this. Okay, so I'm trying to build a picture of this triangle. Might have to snip this out of the podcast because it's really hard. But the triangle comprises of the North Pole, and then you go all the way down from the North Pole to the equator. Yeah. And then you go a quarter way along the equator. Yeah. And then you go back up to the North Pole.
Is that still a triangle if it's a curved line? Is it a different shape?
That's a straight line on the curved surface.
Yeah, I guess relative to what?
Yeah. So, technically, if your triangle on planet Earth is big enough, the angles will not add up to 180 because the Earth is curved. This is just a little trivia.
That's actually.
But
that's
when
a really
I
good
found
point.
that out about triangles and people actually making those measurements and finding out that it's not exactly 180, and that's how we live on a curved planet.
That's true. We do.
Yeah, that was pretty cool for me to know.
That's such an interesting perspective. Like, that's like a different perspective that I haven't considered. Like, when you expect things to be absolute truths, and they're not. Yeah. Absolutely not.
But, I mean, the geometry that you're talking about is Euclidean geometry, where you presume that everything is flat.
Correct.
And on, like, in a flat world, triangles add up to 180.
Yeah. But do we live in a flat world? I guess there are flat surfaces. Are surfaces
they're like
flat?
locally flat. As in, if you don't go too far, things are kind of flat.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
gotcha.
Yeah.
So if you drew it on a paper,
then it's going to be...
It's going to be flat.
Yeah, it's going to be nearly identically 180 degrees.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So, okay, so you...
That's really
sorry, threw you off your...
Totally okay, yeah. And then in undergrad, I was very... So my first year of undergrad, I spent a lot of time alone. But just because, like, I was like, okay, I go to class, and then I was just, like, on the computer a lot. And I had, like, a little online community. So I guess I was physically alone, but not, like, mentally or socially.
What is this online community?
On Facebook, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if you remember, but there used to be, like, these little games you can play on Facebook with the little characters.
Maybe. Pirates versus Ninjas was one that I kind of remember vaguely.
Okay, yeah. I don't remember the names of them or anything like that. But I had known someone at that university that I also knew from my, like, congregation from the mosque. And she was like, hey, you should come hang out with, like, this group of people. They were the group that does, like, record videos and for the university and does, like, commercial, like, stuff like that. And I was like, yeah, okay. And so I went with them, and I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. And I just, ever since then, became, like, really involved in, like, student group and student life up until I graduated. And then even after that, I've always been involved in community work. And to this day, it informs a lot of my work in my research. So I feel like there's a lot of different, I mean, I think this is the case for a lot of people, but there's a lot of different phases, a lot of different, like, pieces of who I've been that, you know, I am now a culmination of all of those. I, like, kind of picked and choose what fits the best for me now, and I try to embody that.
Yeah. One lingering question I had was about Yemenis in Saudi Arabia. So they're like a whole different ethnic group that look different from other people who are Arabs. Or I'm asking some very basic questions that I just don't know.
That's
about.
okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I mean, you can tell the difference between people. Like, people, you know, generally look different. Like, I'm sure you can tell the difference between people from, like, North India and South India, right?
Yeah.
They're all Indian, but they maybe have different languages or at the very least different dialects and, you know, different foods and some different traditions, but some overlapping.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, you know, the same thing in the Middle East. You have the different countries. You can very easily tell if someone is from Egypt, for example, based off of the dialects are very distinct. But also there is a little bit of, you know, features that are different as well. I mean, it's a large area of the globe, so you know, people generally know that I am Yemeni. Like, if people are from the Middle East, they can tell that I'm Yemeni. But a lot of Desi people actually think that I'm Desi.
Yeah. Well, when you say Desi, you mean, like, Indian, right?
Yeah, South Asian. Right.
Yeah. So what is the dominant, like, who gets the benefit of the racism in Saudi Arabia? Are these people called Arabs or, like, what?
Just Saudi Arabians. This is very nationalistic, yeah.
Okay.
So Saudi Arabians are pro-Saudi Arabia. Like, right now I have, my uncle lives in Saudi Arabia, and the government taxes people who are not nationally Saudi Arabian by the individual. And I think a lot of it is, you know, straight up discrimination, right? Feeling and bias, feeling that Saudi Arabians are better. and then trying to kind of kick out immigrants from Saudi Arabia, which is really interesting because, Saudi Arabia is built off of, they bring in a lot of people from different countries to build the place, and then they treat them really poorly.
Yeah, but that's like dispensable stuff. They're not, they're just like building stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Not treated really as part of the country. But
yeah. But wait, so you are not like Saudi Arabian?
No.
Oh, okay. So like...
so Saudi Arabia would not claim me as anything, even though I was born there.
Yeah, I have heard a similar thing. There was this ethnically Indian person that I knew who also considers herself to be Indian, even though she was born and raised in Saudi Arabia for similar reasons. She's like, oh yeah, I don't even get citizenship.
No.
And I don't know, a bunch of crap like that I heard, and I was like pretty surprised. I was like, that sounds annoying to like live there. And basically has her own community. It's just like the Indian community is separate from the rest of the world. They go to Indian school and everything, and it's just so difficult. Sometimes it's like prohibitive to assimilate with.
My mom actually, she was born and somewhat raised in Yemen, and then when she was in middle school, they moved to Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
And lived there from middle school all the way to the end of medical school, and she doesn't feel any affiliation to the country, and they don't recognize her in any way.
They're lost.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I agree.
But that's okay. And what about you? Have 4 brothers?
Yeah, I have 4 brothers and a little sister. So I have an older brother, and then I have 3 younger brothers, and then my sister is the youngest. She just turned 10 on Tuesday.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what did you study in college?
Okay, that's a good question. So, like I said, I loved math. That was my favorite subject in high school. I remember in math class, whenever we would finish the work, we would have these little games where we would have 2 people go on the board, and the teacher would give us a math problem and see who would finish it first. And I was always put on the board, right? Because people were like, "Oh my god, let's see how she does it." Because I just loved, it was just easier for me to do it in my head.
Yeah.
And so when it was time to go to college, so how I said I just wanted to get out and go to college, but I didn't think about what I would do in college. I just knew that I wanted to get out of high school. And so when I was going to college, I was like, oh shoot, what am I going to study in college? I don't know. I have no idea. And, some people were like, study math. And I was like, what am I going to do with math? They're like, study teaching. I was like, I don't really like teaching, and it's not something I only want to do. Teaching, it's fun, but and my grandfather is an accountant, and he was like, be an accountant, you like math. And I was like, I mean, I guess that's the closest thing that I can find. And so my first year of college, I was an accounting major, and I absolutely hated it. It was the worst thing ever. I did not like it at all. I was like, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. And so I was like, okay, I need to change my major, because there was the accounting piece, but I just didn't like the business world. I didn't like the suit and tie, very professional, having to kind of put on a face. That just wasn't who I was, and I just felt very out of place. And so I was like, I don't know what to do. I guess I'll switch to math, because that's what I was really interested in. I ask you,
why is accounting the closest thing to math? Math is the closest thing to math.
So then I started majoring in math, and I was like, man, this is way too theoretical for me.
Oh.
I like applied math.
Yeah.
I want to solve for numbers rather than understand these conceptual things.
Yeah.
It just wasn't as fun.
Yeah.
And so I did switch to math. And then you have to take these general education classes, and I took a logic class in philosophy. Loved it. And I was like, yes, this is an application of math, really, right?
Yeah.
But it's with people, right? And I was like, this is great, because now I have a better way of understanding people's thought processes through math, right? And so I switched to a philosophy major. But then I was like, what am I going to do with a philosophy major? I'm just switching these majors, and afterwards thinking oh shoot, what am I going to do? And then I took a psychology of prejudice class. I want to say between my second and third year, and I loved it. I was like, oh my God, like the class was a lot of research and really just saying like, you know, the research tells us, you know, people generally have these kinds of attitudes or people generally do this. And I was like, you mean I can understand human behavior? Like what? That was mind blowing to me. And keep in mind at this time I was like 16, 17. And I was like, I love this. Like this is the application of that logic, but really more in human behavior. And so I switched to a psychology major. And then while I was, you know, doing all of that, like switching academic wise, I was also, like I said, really involved in a lot of, you know, student groups, a lot of identity-based ones. And I went to a lecture. So I have a minor in philosophy and a major in psychology. And I went to a lecture about Muslim mental health, and specifically young people's mental health, young Muslims' mental health. And at this time, I was kind of like volunteering at the mosque, and I was doing these student groups with the Muslim Student Association. And I was having a lot of conversations with people, just kind of like processing what it's like to be young and, you know, be kind of like an in-between, you know, different cultures and all of that. And so I went to this lecture that was talking about young Muslim mental health and how this is like a field that you can study and, you know, contribute to. And the speaker at the end of the talk said, you know, this is what our organization does. We do this kind of research and we're looking for interns. So if anybody's interested, you know, just come up and, you know, let's talk. And for the first time in my life, I was like, you know what? I'm going to go talk to the speaker. And so I just went up to her and I was like, hey, I really liked your talk. I would love to be part of whatever you're doing. This sounds really interesting. And I've been part of that organization for the last 8 years. Oh, wow. And right now I'm actually leading a nationwide, like, pilot study on youth belonging in mosques. And how do we build an intervention to increase belonging. And so, yeah, I feel like a lot of things are kind of set up for me, really. Like, you know, I had to have taken that psych of prejudice class. I had to have been involved in that. So that psych of prejudice class, I was also like, okay, I need to go talk to this professor and be like, how do I do this? And so I went to his office hours and I was like, can you teach me? And so I joined his research lab. And then after that, I went to that lecture and I was like, oh my God, I love this. So I went to her and I was like, can I join? And she's like, yeah, sure. I've been part of that. So I feel like a lot of these things are placed in my life, right? Like I got the exact training of the things that I absolutely love to do. And so right now I do research on discrimination and identity. So I've been doing this research for the last 10 years, you know, this work for the last 10 years. And I don't think a lot of people can say that at like 27.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah. So where was your undergrad?
It was at the University of Michigan in Dearborn.
Okay.
Yeah, so Dearborn is known to be like the epicenter of Arab Americans and Muslims.
Yeah. And then how many years ago did you finish your undergrad?
2014. So I graduated from high school in 2009. And I've been in college ever since. So I've been in college for 11 years now. About to be 12. So
2014 you finished your undergrad.
And then I went to my master's program.
Which is still what you're doing now? Or?
So right now I'm doing my PhD.
Oh, you're doing your PhD, yeah. And where was your master's?
My master's was at Wayne State University.
What?
Wayne State University in Detroit. Okay.
And that was on, like, you had a thesis and what was that on?
Yeah. My thesis was a systematic review of the literature from 2005 to 2015 on Muslim youth. And so at that point, even in my master's program, so when I was in undergrad, I knew I wanted to get my PhD. So my dad, at some point in my life, when I was like 15 or 16, he was like, Hanan, you can study whatever you want as long as you're a doctor.
Like a medical doctor?
No, just like a doctor, yeah. And I was like, okay. So but I think it came from a place like, you know, knowing that like I had the capacity to do that, you know, like, And so, I mean, I knew I wanted to get my PhD because I was just like, my parents are doctors. Like, I also need to, I have the ability to do it. I know I can do it. And so so actually for undergrad, I did undergrad in 5 years, and I really wanted to finish it in 4 years, right? I was this kid who was like doing everything really fast, and it had become part of my identity.
But you also switched majors 3 times.
Correct. So. But it was still part of who I was, that I like needed to be quicker. I needed to be smarter. Yeah. And I had a really big identity crisis. Yeah. And I remember the day that I made that decision to take an extra year. Yeah. And I remember being like, Hanan, like, chill out, And I mean, ever since then, I keep telling myself to chill out. Yeah. And I feel like I've been
something similar but different that also happened in undergrad.
For you as well? Yeah.
Similar but different. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I couldn't keep up with myself, really. I couldn't keep up with my expectations of myself. Yeah. But I still knew that I wanted to get my PhD, and so I was applying to doctoral programs and master's programs in undergrad. And I did get accepted to a doctoral program, but I was like, okay, I'm going to start this doctoral program. That's going to take, 6-7 years of my life. Yeah. And I only have a bachelor's in psychology. And at that point, my sister was 3. My siblings were still elementary and middle school and high school. And so I was like, I don't want to make that commitment and then something happened to my parents, and then I don't have any way to support my siblings. Mm. And so for that reason, I made the decision to do my master's first. Because I was like, I can do my master's, get that done in 2 years, and it'll help me with my PhD program, but at least I have now something in my pocket. Yeah. So if, something happens, I can stop my PhD program and I still have a way to make good money.
I see.
Yeah. Okay. But so even in my master's program, I knew I was going to apply for doctoral programs. Mm-hmm. And so for my thesis, I wanted to do something that was going to help me in my doctoral program. And I knew that I wanted to do research on Muslim youth mental health. Mm. So kind of coming into the game, I kind of already knew what I wanted to do. And so that's why for my thesis, I did a systematic review of the literature. And I actually, one of my early publications was on, what the research says. What does the research say? I think it's called something like that. Mm-hmm. Muslim youth research. Yeah, something like that. That was written with Dr. Samira Ahmed, who is a person from that lecture.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah. So she's been my mentor ever since. Yeah. And I have meetings with her every week, which is pretty crazy to me.
And then, since then, you've been doing your PhD here at UT Austin?
Yeah. Okay. So I did my master's program for 2 years, graduated in 2016. And 2016 is when I started here at UT Austin. And so should be done in a year and a half. Yeah.
I saw, when I Googled you, I saw somewhere else that you're are you working also with some institute or some...
The Family and Youth Institute. That's the nonprofit that I've been working with. The Family and Youth Institute. That's the nonprofit that I've been working with for the last 8 years. So I started off as an intern. And now I am a researcher and a community educator. And so I do research with them. But I also do community education workshops. So I've gone to different mosques around the country to give workshops on parenting, mental health, how to deal with bullying, stuff like that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. What is this, and what's the podcast?
So...
2 podcasts, I guess.
Yeah. So that's separate. Yeah. Okay. So a few years ago, or a couple of years ago, I was approached by so there's a national organization called Muslim Youth of North America, and they have these annual week-long camps that high schoolers plan for high schoolers and middle schoolers also. And so they approached me, the organization approached me, the adults of the organization, and they said, hey, we're noticing that in a lot of our camps, we have these kids who are there for a week and a lot of their issues come up and we don't know what to do. We don't know how to deal with it. Can you help us kind of create a position for a mental health consultant or a therapist or something to come? And so I helped them create a mental health consultant position. So someone would come and just kind of be there to provide skills for the counselors, do de-escalation, crisis management, stuff like that. And so I got to do that. And I met a lot of people, really amazing people there, and they were like, this is amazing. It was obviously really helpful. We're going to want to hire you for like the next 2 years, right? And I was like, oh, shoot, okay, I guess I need to kind of make this into like an LLC because I get a lot of consulting little gigs, right? So a lot of different organizations, some local, some like local here, some local in Michigan that ask me to do some of these things. And so I was like, okay, maybe I need to form some sort of LLC because I'm deathly afraid of immigrant parents.
Oh my God.
And so I was like, I need something to protect myself. So that it's like, it's the it's like the LLC that,
Yeah.
Ow.
Wait,
And
why
so-
are you deathly afraid of immigrant? Are you deathly afraid of your own parents?
I used to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to be very afraid of them.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm afraid of immigrant parents because they're very protective of their kids.
They're also
right?
pretty intense,
Yeah, they're very intense and they're very like black and white sometimes. And so I was like, I just needed to protect myself. And so I created this LLC. But one of the things that I was noticing with my work with a lot of high schoolers is that a lot of the same questions were coming up, right? And so that's where that podcast came up. And also like my Instagram page and my website, because I was like, I need to have kind of like a centralized place for all of this. And so on my Instagram page, Hey Hashem, you'll see like there's different quotes, and these are all things that people have said to me over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And they're like, hey, I have this thought, what is your response to it? And so that's where that came out of. And even that one podcast episode that I have up is like a question that I get from a lot of different people. So that's where that came from. The other podcast is with Safa Institute. And so, are you familiar with Nueces Mosque?
Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
familiar as in I know where it is and like.
Yeah,
walk
so
by
it's a
it,
little
etc.
mosque. It's run by college students on the campus. And they had asked me to come and do a talk on, like, how do you help your friends how do you help a friend that's going through something? What do you say? What do you not say? Stuff like that. And so, I went and I did that lecture for them. And I was approached afterwards by some of the students, and they were like, hey, we really want to, like, start this therapy fund for, young Muslim college students who want to go to therapy but can't afford it. But they also wanted to create more, like, culture. One of the issues with, like, minority people going to therapy is that there isn't a lot of cultural competency with therapists, right? So you have a Muslim person or like, an immigrant. And I don't want to conflate the two, right? Not all Muslims are come from immigrant families, and obviously not all immigrant families are Muslim. But being Muslim it's a different culture. And it comes with different traditions, and it comes with different very specific values that Muslims want to adhere to. And so one example is like, having this deep reverence for parents, right? Which is like, common in a lot of Eastern cultures. And so oftentimes when someone goes to therapy, they're like, I'm having a conflict with my parents. The therapist would be like, okay, like talk to them about it. And there's no talking to parents sometimes. And, or if, so within the Muslim culture, there are certain things that are not necessarily allowed, like dating, like casual dating. And so if someone is saying like, oh yeah, I have a casual partner, but I know that I shouldn't, and it's causing a lot of conflict, the therapist might help them reduce the internal conflict rather than help them stop the behavior. Right? So you see how there's like just a difference in values, right? And so a lot of people don't go to therapists. A lot of like Muslims, or a lot of just people of color generally don't go to therapists because there's just this barrier in culture. And so this organization wants to so part of this organization, me and a couple of local therapists are creating a cultural competency training for local therapists in Austin to teach them a little bit about like how being Muslim interacts with like these different systems and how it impacts their symptoms and diagnoses and relationships and all of that. So yeah. And then also we're doing some research as well. So, and then Safa, so that's Safa Institute. And so they're doing their own podcast, and I was part of that where I was like the moderator for some of these discussions. So that's the trailer that's up that you heard.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So there's a lot of different stuff.
I'm getting a picture now.
Mm-hmm.
On a completely random spectrum of this picture, what is this thing that you did about... You had some paper about the attitudes of conspiracy theorists?
Yeah, I did. So in undergrad, I was... I took this, like... It was like a... so there's a software that a lot of like social scientists use, SPSS. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Yeah, it's a pretty simple compared to other programming softwares like R, where it's like point and click. But I was in this class learning how to do it and learning how to do the syntax for it, and we had to come up with an idea for a study to run, and I think we were just all really, at that point, I don't know what it was, like 2013 or something, like we were all just very curious about conspiracy theorists, and we were like, oh, we can assess the attitudes of people who have, like, we can understand people who have conspiracy theory, who are more likely to have conspiracy theories. And so it really just came from a place of like, oh, this is interesting. And the purpose was really to use that as a tool to learn the software.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you take data about things that they have said about other stuff, and then you try and find if it predicts whether they will...
Yeah, so we had like a scale on like, whether you're likely to believe in conspiracy theories, and then we had other attitudes. I can't remember what the other attitudes were, and we just wanted to see like what attitudes predict someone to have conspiracy, to hold conspiracy theories.
I think my dad is going to rank pretty highly.
Really?
Scale. Yeah. I think he believes in a lot of conspiracy theories.
I believe in a lot of conspiracy theories too.
And yet you say that...
Oh,
what?
yeah.
How? What?
Because I feel like anything can happen.
Oh.
So I don't want to close the possibility of like certain things being true.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, Harvey Weinstein, not Harvey Weinstein, but what's his name? The guy... Epstein? No, is it Epstein? What is the guy that had like the kids?
I don't know. I don't know about these things. I live under a
okay. Well, there's a lot of conspiracy theories that were proven to be true.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, you know what?
Yeah.
Unless you can give me hard evidence that it's not true, then even then I'll still believe that it might be true. You
know about the flat Earth conspiracy thing?
I do.
Yeah. So the upside of that would be that all triangles would add up to 180 degrees.
Right. That's true.
Pretty simple. Yeah.
It could, right? Maybe.
Yeah. Okay. So, I think we're pretty much done with this
section?
Intro. Hanan 101. The one little thing that I think I kind of missed in this
timeline.
Yeah, in this timeline is, at what point did you learn the kind of the basic tools and techniques of therapy? Was it in your undergrad or your master's? Because you said that people consult you, like about these kids and stuff. So at what point did you learn those things so as to consult with people or consult with therapists?
So I didn't
de-escalation and stuff like that.
I didn't learn the therapy piece of it until my master's program. But even in my undergrad, I was still like fairly younger than other people. Yeah. But I remember that I was seen as a mentor for a lot of people that were older than me. Yeah. And I think that a lot of things contributed to that. I think I really helped raise my younger siblings. I think I was just, I really understood the power of sitting with someone and understanding the processes that an individual partakes in, and understanding that can be different for different people. And so to understand what someone is going through, you can't assume. And so because I was just really curious and I asked a lot of people a lot of questions, and I was always wanting to know people's stories and how they came to these conclusions, I think that really helped me become a little bit more aware about the way that humans interact. Yeah. And I'm sure you probably experienced that as well, where some things may seem like a little bit obvious to you when it comes to human interaction, where for you it's like a question mark, but you can see other people making assumptions about people's behaviors, but you're like, wait, we don't have enough information to know that. And I think that allows us to have, like, I think a deeper level of compassion for people and for just, like, not knowing.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us for this part of our conversation in the Room of Lives. In the next 2 parts, we talk about Islam and her therapy.